adaptive intelligence. You searched for more. You wanted to become the best version of yourself. Your search is over. And the technology finally exists. To go beyond limits. Your time has come. Unleash your potential. AQ. Adaptive intelligence.
Welcome back, everyone, to AQ Adaptive Intelligence. So today we have a amazing and quite adaptive guest. We'll be talking about adaptive AI algorithms and game theory. So our guest today is called Noah HEALY, and he has done many things, including nuclear physics and mathematics. He's dabbled quite extensively, I would say, with different types of algorithms, including AI. He also has consulted several companies, some of which he might name if he wants to. And so he consults them, even in crypto projects, on making sure that their systems are basically adaptive and able to perpetuate cohesion with what they're trying to accomplish, but also maintain a level of ethics. So as I mentioned, he both professionally and personally loves game theory. So we'll be talking about that a little bit and how it ties into the big picture of everything. And if you're lucky, you might find him at some of our events. So feel free to check those out, including this one today. And without further ado, we'll be talking about We'll be talking about adaptive AI algorithms and game theory. So without further ado, I bring to you Noah HEALY.
Hello.
Hey Noah, how's it going?
It's going okay. Happy to be here. This promises to be fun.
Exactly. And so, you reached out to me and I was very intrigued by what you do. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, how that ties into being adaptive and why it's so important, especially in our times, like our crazy, crazy times.
Right. Well, my primary focus these days is in marketplace design. And markets are systems that effectively inform us how to order our lives in ways that are economically viable, which is a lot of very big words. So to kind of think about it in terms of this adaptive structure, uh, humans are social animals, and the society, the social structure of humans has a cooperative element. Uh, None of us are self-sufficient. None of us are capable of being self-sufficient living at the wealth level that we presently do. Um, it is vaguely barely possible to find some scrap of earth that's so remote nobody wants it and live on it by yourself until you don't wake up some morning. If self-sufficiency is attractive to you, but if you want family, friends, culture, and internet, television, movies, tractors, cars, and all the other cool stuff, you need other people. So we see a lot of different, you know, social patterns in nature, from prides of lions to herds of sheep, Humans obviously have much more sophisticated mechanisms that we use, and one of the most important ones is the financial markets. The financial markets tell us how we allocate capital to the production of food and clothing and shelter and industrial materials that we go to make, cars and robots and computers. And what my insight is about is how to design those things to keep working in the face of the extraordinary information explosion that the internet has been bringing about, which is important because the systems that presently get used are not robust to that explosion. And what we've been seeing over the past third to half century is those systems becoming less and less stable and more expensive, and consequently less adaptive. And we are all suffering from that today.
Yeah, I actually overheard somebody talk about something that struck me as interesting. So they said that basically when you go to a bank and you deposit your money, they don't, it's not like attached to some cloud. They actually go to a computer in the back room and then they basically send an order and then later on it gets processed by somebody who knows like a very unique and very like almost like ancient code at this point. And so it's a very like it's just a very old system that they use and that's why it's so slow and it takes, 1 to 3 business days usually or more. Um, can you speak to that?
Oh, absolutely. So I actually had an aunt that was employed in this regard. So one of the issues that is involved is that well, greed is a major driver for many people in the financial industry. These problems are ultimately not of human making, at least not of direct human making. So the problem isn't that some greedy fat cat has figured out how to steal all of your money. It's more a case of sort of like dry rot. That there's now so much going on that the system is no longer stable or robust, and so particularly with banks, really the only way to achieve our current markets see as a reasonable level of profitability is through size. You have to get up into that too big to fail zone, and then really pull the plunger out where, Uncle Sam is going to backstop you when you inevitably, you know, make your huge mistakes. And so what happens is that the banks basically buy banks. And so your bank doesn't really have a banking system per se. What they have is lots of banking systems that were cobbled together idiosyncratically by the large numbers of banks that they absorbed on their way to becoming the mega super bank that they are today. So while if you have a local bank and you're banking through them, you might find that your money transfers in fact turn around in minutes or seconds. That's because they're using their own idiosyncratic banking system that they personally cobbled together out of whatever they decide to do. But I had an aunt that until she retired, used to drive an hour every day to go sit in a building with a bunch of other people with the same job. And she had two computers, not a computer with two monitors, two computers on her desk, one of which was had one of the banking systems that this bank had absorbed in it, and the other one of which had another banking system that this one had absorbed in it. And her job was to physically transcribe entries from what it said on the screen in one system to what it said on the screen in the other system. Uh, and that was her job. And there were lots and lots of people with that job. Uh, Various advances in computer technology are making it, more efficient and more dangerous for them to do that without the rooms full of humans that used to be required, say, a decade plus ago. But it's still a slow process to get things across. There's many potential errors requiring much potential checking, and so that's pretty much the primary cause of that.
Yeah, and something I've noticed too with with AI, at least large language models, is that they're really bad at math. So, there's
They
potential for
are,
error there for
yes.
sure.
Yes, they are quite exceptionally bad at math. There was a recent paper out of, I believe, Google's Deep team where they actually produced a highly impressive mathematical AI, but they did so in sort of game AI style and rather than the pure generative AI style, where they were developing generative AIs that were trying to come up with inventive approaches and then pairing that with a program known as a proof checker. So there are proof checkers or proof assistants. These are computer programs that are not quite as powerful as programming languages. And because they're not quite that powerful, it is possible to actually check whether or not what they're doing is what they're supposed to be doing. Whereas with programming languages, because of how powerful they are, it's actually impossible to check whether or not what they're doing is what they're supposed to be doing. Um, and so, this, by the way, is the primary cause of computer bugs and why computer bugs are always going to be with us. So, what this was doing was taking a proof checker, having it handed these approaches by a generative AI, and then having the proof checker actually carry out the proof and see if it solved the problem that was being given. And these are problems that were designed to be sort of intentionally deceptive. And this system, so it was going against problems that had been generated for the Geometry Olympiad. This is a test that scores from 0 to 100 that some of the smartest people in the world compete at from national teams. I believe the median score on this test is 1. Roughly half of the people taking this test get no points, um, and a decent number of people only get 1 point. Uh, the average top human score on this test was a little over 36. The average second place human score was a little over 32, and the computer scored about a 35. So, within a few percent of the smartest human being on Earth, several percent higher than the second smartest human being on Earth, but still in the human range, not like Go or poker, far beyond the human range.
Yeah, so when they're, manually typing in the numbers, you have the chance for human error, or even when they're using, different AIs or different systems, or even, checking systems to make sure it's working right, there's still human error intrinsic within that
Oh,
system.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the fundamental problem is that these large companies are being operated by people who do not actually understand how their company itself is operating. Um, there are examples all over the place of incompetent technology leadership. Probably one of the most famous in my early childhood, I saw the Challenger disaster. I was one of the school children that was, pulled out of class to watch on video because there was a school teacher on board, and the thing blew up. Uh, as it eventually transpired, the shuttle was designed with a significant amount of redundancy and safety checks, uh, and the management were not engineers, and they decided to behave as if the safety margins were tolerable margins. So if a part is designed to be 300% of its toleration and it has been degraded 33%, then it's still at 200% of its rated requirements. And so you're fine. But that is insane nonsense because parts are part of a systemic whole which depend upon the individual components being at their specifications, and management was essentially allowing for widespread specification. Of course, the O-rings specifically were called out as something that was actually beyond its safety tolerances, but the full report was incredibly damning, and humanity responded to this knowledge that putting non-engineers in charge of technical projects was, criminally negligent, by pretty much exclusively putting non-engineers in charge of technical projects for every single project that humans have been engaged in since. So, things like what we were just talking about before, the Microsoft CrowdStrike outage, which is again a mass scale management failure across thousands of institutions, demonstrating that their senior management is simply incompetent to have jobs. And it is definitely not being treated that way in the news or culturally, or, every one of these companies that had an outage, which included major marketplaces, has not seen their stocks rapidly approaching zero.
Yeah, and you were saying before that, if we were to look at things realistically, I think you threw out a number where I forget who was it that calculates that $5 million is what a human life is equivalent to.
So, yeah, the I believe it's the EPA uses a sort of human life equivalency number, and I believe it's American lives, but well, let's not quibble. They use sort of $5 million. So if you do $5 million worth of damage to an ecosystem, or $5 million worth of damage to a city's infrastructure, or in some other way do $5 million worth of damage, statistically, you will have effectively canceled out a human life, and in all probability, you will wind up killing a person. Bad water is produced, and that will shorten lives, and so on. And the most generous, Pollyannish estimates put these numbers in the billions of losses for what happened with this thing. And I've seen some people throw the number trillion around. And so we're talking about statistically thousands of lives being lost as a result of this. And it's mostly being treated as sort of a silly nerd story, from what I can tell in the media.
Yeah, and like you said, that's untold damage. And then you also said that there was something that happened with airplanes where they would just crash automatically.
Well, yeah, Boeing is very definitely in the crosshairs. I mean, there's a handful of very public instances. The Alaska airline, where the door hatch just flew out of the airplane. But the quality control on their systems is apparently functionally non-existent. And parts are falling off of Boeing's on a regular basis. Uh, that it may or may not be connected, but there's an issue right now with two astronauts on the space station, where they're not using their Boeing capsule. Uh, uh, and everybody says that it's all okay, but they're still up there beyond, their time. So Boeing was an airplane manufacturing company. It is now a money laundering company that uses its history as an airplane manufacturing company to move capital from, investors into the pockets of its board and whatever other preferred shareholders it has, through stock manipulation, and by cheaping out as much as they believe that they can get away with on airplane manufacture. And because they are not engineers, they cannot, in fact, properly estimate to the degree to which they can cheap out on manufacture and quality control.
Jeez. So that's a big problem. There's lots of big problems, and we're overly dependent on a few companies that hold all the power and basically use algorithms that are less than desirable. So that ties into what you do, right? So let's talk a little bit about what you do. You figured out a way to essentially fix this, right? Tell us about that.
Uh, yeah. So One of the more impressive breakthroughs in human cooperation are commodity markets. Creating marketplaces in which everything that gets traded is the same as everything else that gets traded. Uh, we tend to think very much in terms of retail, not coincidentally because of cultural factors that have raised that sort of marketing. But if what you want is apples, being able to go to multiple potential sources for the same apple is of great benefit, because if one of the sources isn't available or got taken over by crooks, or you know just screwed something up and that apple got dropped on the floor, then there's an immediate alternative. And that advantage is bilateral. Um, the makers of these apples also have an advantage where if you personally don't show up, the next guy will, and so they will still be able to make a sale even if their buddy isn't there. So in a sort of classic village scenario, you would have, say, the miller that makes flour and the baker that makes bread and the villagers that are growing wheat, and that's all fine. They don't need a national scale market unless the miller's plant breaks, and now they can't make flour out of wheat anymore, and now they got all this wheat that they have to chew on, and that's no fun. Or the baker drops over dead and his apprentice can't make good bread, and now everybody has sucky bread from now on. Or there's a major storm and the wheat crop is wiped out and everybody just starves to death. All of which are you know actual things that have happened in history,
Wow.
basically. So by establishing a standard for grains, uh, meat, wood, and other products, we can create markets where confluent supply and demand can come together and substitute for the vicissitudes of fate in any particular local area.
Hmm.
And that is how our system has worked for 800 years.
Hmm.
The difficulty is that uh, that system is now being driven by computers and the internet. And what that has led to is a vastly greater number of players in the game. So, whereas previously um, there were roughly uh, eight-ish middlemen per buyer and seller in the system, today there are roughly 45-ish middlemen for each buyer and seller in the system.
Interesting. So why the change in number?
Because computers, and this is an interesting general principle, computers affect different niches differently. So there's a common saying you hear a lot, that technology is neutral. It's not good or evil. It's what people do with it. Well, okay, sort of. But in an adaptive system, what you will discover is that niches appear. There will be stable or stable-ish, quasi-stable, strategic approaches that allow the entities or people within that space to continue within that space. So in a swamp, you'll see dragonflies and birds hunting insects at different times of the day. And there'll be a niche for one and a niche for the other one, and they don't have to compete with one another. Um, in 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 sort of the classic thing, there's predator and prey, and it's not like being prey is a death sentence. Um, Prey is a stable condition to have, and in fact, that's not enough. There's also plants, because of course there's no animals that can produce their own energy. So
Hmm.
you've got plants that just sit there and get eaten, and somehow they're an enormous fraction of the global biomass. How are they so much of the biomass if their entire life strategy is just getting eaten? Well, because they've got niches. And if a herbivore overgrazes, and then they will spike in number and then all die off from starvation and disease when there aren't enough plants around anymore, and the plants mess with that stuff too. uh, they stagger the rates at which they produce food. They develop poisons and so on. Wood was adapted in order to protect them. So if you have a set of niches and you introduce a new factor to the environment, then some of those niches will thrive with that factor. Some of those niches will be indifferent to that factor, and some of those niches will be destroyed by that factor. The story of the dodo bird, for example, and a general story of invasive species just about everywhere. A new thing comes in, it's not neutral. Some niches are fine. Some niches show up that didn't used to exist. Some niches that used to exist get wiped out. And in this case, the expensive part of being a middleman in the system was being able to acquire and make judgments based on information. So if a technology that makes it less expensive and quicker to acquire and make decisions based on information, then that sector of the system grows in power relative to the other sectors. And this is exactly what we see over the last 50-ish years or so, basically since Nixon took us off the gold standard. The financial system as a fraction of this country's economy, and in fact the global economy, has been growing. Um, if your brain was growing as a fraction of your body's mass, uh, you know, maybe that would work out for you if it didn't, hit the outside of your skull and start killing itself. But in all probability, that would actually indicate that you had brain cancer and it was going to kill you. And that's exactly what's going on right now. It's becoming more and more expensive to acquire information that is relevant less and less to our actual lives. And so since we're economically organizing around this information, our economic organizations are becoming less and less capable. And if we had markets that were capable of integrating, good information and promulgating it properly, things like the Boeing situation where they're confessing effectively to the federal government that they have changed from being an engineering company to being a stock manipulation company. Um, a functioning marketplace should be able to recognize that fact and revalue the stock before airplanes start falling out of the sky. Uh, and also should be able to create smoother supply chains that are more profitable to produce in. One thing I quote a lot. This is getting older as it recedes into the past, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, that was like the world's third largest wheat producer invading the world's fifth largest wheat producer, and the wheat market went absolutely ballistic. It went crazy. And as a result of this, Canada and the United States, one and two on the wheat production sweepstakes, uh, increased total wheat productive acres by zero because the actual producers of wheat didn't get that windfall. The system was able to chew up 100% of that windfall before the price signal got to the people who can actually do something about it. uh, because they can't afford the expensive computer arrays and continuous attention required to actually be able to exploit those situations. And so that's a failure. That's a market failure, and that is a constant and consistent story. of more recent vintage, there was evidently a large-scale seasonal weather problem leading to Ghana producing vastly less chocolate than they normally do. For those who do not know, chocolate is relatively hard to grow. It needs incredible amounts of water, and its roots rot almost instantly. So it needs very sandy soil that it rains constantly on, effectively. So many of the places where chocolate grow chocolate because human beings like chocolate.
I know I do.
Well, yes, yeah. There was apparently a $1 billion-ish miss in the amount of chocolate produced in the last year. And the chocolate market is currently whipsawing, trying to figure out what that means for the price of chocolate. There are speculators that believe that prices might be increasing as much as 150%. And that is by 150%, not to 150%. So to 250% of existing prices. Right now, it's bouncing back and forth, sort of plus minus 10%. But it's not really stabilizing very well, and nobody really knows what's going on. And that's essentially because the markets are no longer designed to stabilize, because the computer owning middlemen make money when the markets are unstable, and the computers allow them to destabilize the marketplaces without incurring the historically existing penalties, because it's not possible to act faster than them in the marketplace, because everybody's now operating at the same speed as the total marketplace.
Yeah, and I've noticed, and this was especially prevalent during COVID. The markets just didn't make sense. Everything just was chaotic, like pure chaos. Like even like real estate speculators were just going crazy. They were buying houses without ever doing an inspection. Like there's all sorts of stories. And so I noticed that there was a disconnect between what the economy is doing, like the actual market is doing, versus what the price shows. So like economy versus market, they're not the same. They're not one to one correlated. And I think that's what you're alluding to, right?
Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's absolutely what I'm talking about. The
Yeah.
the financial system. So, for those who've seen The Big Short or lived through that era, are aware that a fairly major financial disruption. Well, you know, a decade earlier, the dot-com crash had occurred. In the late '80s, there was actually a flash crash. Uh, in the late '90s, long-term capital management nearly imploded the global economy. That one was largely swept under the rug. Um, we've had multiple serious Asian crises that have gone contagion. Um, 6 or 7 years ago, we had to shut down the beef market on a bad trade. Uh, of more recent vintage, we had to shut down the nickel market. We had the flash crash in, what was it, 2010, where they thought it was actually going to turn into a general, post-apocalyptic scenario, but then it turned out not to. Flash crashes are in fact a daily event across the marketplace somewhere. We've had the Wall Street bets situation. Um, it's not that the markets were incapable of insane and crashing behavior historically, but historically, people, most human beings would experience one major marketplace disruption during their professional lives, and some unfortunately birthed people would experience a couple. A few really long-lived people would, in the course of their entire lives, see three. We have people who aren't in high school who have seen seven or eight. Uh, and the rate at which they are happening is quickening. This is easy to understand from the perspective of information theory and game theory and adaptive, algorithms. It's a natural result, just like if you have a space shuttle and you let all of the parts degrade by 33% and then launch it when you're not supposed to, it'll blow up. because of course it will.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense, logically thinking. But it's crazy how the little things like escape people. So, out of curiosity, and I know we spoke a little bit about this. You had patented some kind of system that would be able to help mediate with these things. What would be the secret sauce behind that? What would allow that to happen, and why have you been so suppressed?
Well, so yeah, suppression is a coming to be decent word. So I'm attempting to patent it. The patent office is being insane. I'm sorry to say. So the secret sauce in my system is that uh, unlike the existing markets that separate every deal into two parts, a buyer and a seller, I separate it into three components. So in a traditional market setting and the way we generally think about economics, a buyer who has a product, it might be a service, it might be a good, but they have a product, and a seller who has a product, and a buyer who has currency, whatever money is available. Um, each one of them implicitly also has information. They know what their circumstances are, they know what their desires are. And so these two parties come together and have a mutualizing of their information and decide whether or not they're going to exchange some amount of their currency for some amount of their product. And that deal, the way the existing market works is it creates an efficient forum for those sorts of agreements to be made. And every time one of those agreements is made, it is published. So people can see what sorts of deals are being made and they can update their own private information based on that so that the entire system can, in theory, equilibrate around a common understanding of what it is that is going on. And this allows you to operate your business, to plan your business for the future, and so on. What I say is information is a real, tangible, physical thing. We record it on hard drives. We can measure it in quantum physics. We can measure it in everything else. So information is a real, tangible thing. So what a deal actually is it's a product, a currency, and an information coming together in joint confluence. And so what we can actually do is have roles. We can have a role of people who are bulk providing product, a role of people who are bulk providing currency, and a role of people who are bulk providing information. And given individuals can take on multiple roles. So just as within the existing system, a buyer has information and currency, a buyer can go in and play the information role and take part in a joint negotiation for the price that will exist, and then decide, based on how that negotiation turns out, whether or not they also want to play a role as a currency provider. Maybe they disagree with the outcome of the negotiation in which they participated, at which point they can simply withdraw from the currency provision role. Maybe they find it agreeable. Maybe it's as good or better than what they were going for, in which case they can happily go in. And the same thing goes for producers, and the same thing goes for these third party information brokers, who right now have to pretend to be buyers and then pretend to be sellers and then pretend to be sellers and pretend to be buyers in order to just trade on their information. And by doing it in this way, the total amount of information that is processed by the system reduces enormously. And the system is actually makes money by equilibrating rather than making money by disequilibrating.
Interesting. Very interesting. So it sounds like a totally different system that also includes more data than what is currently being provided.
I wouldn't say more data, I would
Mhm.
say more signal.
More signal. Okay.
So information can be divided. You may have in like high school physics been exposed to the notion that there's energy and conservation of energy, and that we divide energy into work and heat. And the difference between work and heat is not the temperature. Work is energy that's being utilized in a way that some human being wants it to be utilized, and heat is all the other energy in the system. Um, Similarly, there's a truly incomprehensible amount of information, not only within our technological systems, but within the universe, flooding through and around us constantly. And so information similarly can be divided between signal and noise. And signal is information that some human being finds useful, and noise is information that no human beings find useful. And the existing system allows for the injection of noise without an appropriate penalty. And what that does is it diminishes the entire system's ability to transport signal. And that's where the whole destabilization comes from. What my system does is specifically measure and reward signal. And so it attaches a cost to noise that the existing systems cannot match, and consequently removes that niche from the arrangement. And so the information is a lot more dense in some sense.
Okay, interesting, interesting. So I do want to go ahead and open up to our audience a little bit. So perhaps we could do a part two in the future to go even deeper as a deeper dive. So if you guys have any questions and you're watching online in the live stream, go ahead and leave a comment, or whatever platform this shows up on. Go ahead and leave a comment and then join us for the next time that we meet up. And we'll be able to go deeper into these topics and more on game theory and AI and algorithms. So that way in the future, you can have your questions answered as well, and we can create a bigger discussion. So go ahead and drop the comments, and in the description of this video, you should also see a link to join us for next time. It's called Thinking Thursdays. Come join us, and we'll see you there. So thank you again, and we'll catch up and add more to this in the future. Sound good? Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let me go ahead and pause this.